Hi everyone, this is Roger Bynum, and we'll get started now. We've had a raft of people log in the last couple of minutes, so we'll get going. Predictive personas is something that we've worked on for many, many years. We used to call them just personas, but predictive's become just in vogue lately with predictive analytics and all sorts of things. So we added predictive to our personas, and you'll see why, I hope, in the course of the next few minutes. And then the rather flippant title of suggesting that your current personas need to grow up and get a life was obviously just a marketing tactic. But again, we'll see if that makes sense to you as we go on. But to begin with, let's just frame what we're trying to do here in terms of this aphorism that comes from Maimonides, a 12th century Spanish philosopher. And this truism exists in many, many cultures, and I decided to ascribe it to Maimonides because he was the first one that I could find who actually wrote it down. But the attitude obviously leads to behavior, and that's really the theme underlying a lot of what we will talk about in how to construct a predictive persona. So in terms of some of the context then for what we're going to talk about, because we are a user research company and we do a lot of testing of user interfaces, of products, and we do a lot of research using surveys. And in the course of that, many of our clients send us their personas in order to help in recruiting or in survey design. And so we get to see a large sample of different persona sets. And in the last 2 years especially, they've become better researched and really well crafted. Having said that, however, there's typically limited insight into why the personas think the way they do. And this is because, from our point of view at least, they weren't researched or built against a mental model. And they therefore lack the coherence and consistency that a mental model would have given them. The application of a mental model during the research and construction, facilitates the predictive capability. And so when we put our mental models together and we show the cause and effect, that's the underlying secret, if you like, to using them as predictive tools. And again, as a client recently observed, this actually brings our personas to life and makes them actionable. So from Maimonides' perspective, you might say that most current sets of personas out there are actually gifts of fish, and the mental model teaches you how to fish. And that's really the sort of framework for how we hope to present this for you today. So let's begin at the end of the process and talk about how predictive personas figure into decision making. And so I'm sure all of you have been part of strategy or brainstorming sessions for deciding, what content needs to be in a content marketing strategy, what features need to be in a product, what functionality needs to be in your website, or in this instance here, your sort of digital strategy. And so if you're lucky, you can get everyone in one room. You have your strategists and your architects and your designers and your CMS folks and your SEO folks and your site search and your product and category managers and your marketing folks and your agencies, and everybody's there, and everybody has an opinion, and everyone knows what's best for the customer. And it's typically an exercise in chaos. If, however, you had a set of predictive personas, these are the types of answers that you could put in front of or in response to any question that you wanted to understand their reaction to. So in this instance, it's how would these different personas respond to a mobile app. And so I've capitalized and called out the conjunctions here, be they causal or conditional, because each of the responses will give you a definitive answer, but then everything that follows the conjunctions explains why you can be certain that they will respond in that way. Because if you don't have the capability of explaining why the persona will respond in a specific way, then you're just guessing. So conjunctions are the keys to understanding a lot of how this mental model works. Okay. So how do we achieve this level of predictability, and again, with this level of confidence that I have in it anyway? And everything is the output of a process. Again, those of you who've done a lot of persona work know you need a disciplined, consistent process. And I characterize it as a practitioner's approach in our webinars and on our blog when I talk about the way we look at it, because I want to distinguish it from the way a company like Forrester will execute personas. I'm not sure that just being the sort of consolidator of best practices from all different sources gives you the same experiential basis. So this is truly a practitioner's approach, because we've been building personas for decades and across all sorts of industries for all sorts of different applications. Our process is geared to this mental model. And the mental model is the key to the predictive capability, as we've mentioned, so we need to delve into it in a little depth here. And so this mental model, and again, there are different options out there for you to use if you ever pursue this approach. This particular model comes from rational emotive therapy, which is a discipline within clinical psychology. And the guy who came up with the model is a fellow by the name of Albert Ellis. And he developed it in the 1970s as a way to treat anger. It's an anger management technique. But his ABC model is very simple. So A is any single activating event, and in this particular example, it's the appearance of a snake, can produce radically different consequence behavior depending on the belief system that filters it. So you could obviously jump on a chair, go hysterical, you could go run into another room, or you could be inclined to pick it up and examine it, just depending upon how you looked at snakes and what your beliefs about snakes were. And so the basic, very, very simple, the very simple principle that this points out is that belief determines behavior. So what we have done over the years is adapt Albert Ellis' model to a business context, and we put it into a vertical arrangement, and we added values to it. And so the model now starts with values at the top, and values, as you would all understand, are defined as the truths that guide our life, and we express our values as things we believe in. We believe in love, honesty, hard work. They're formed over time, and they're not readily susceptible to change. And our attitudes are underpinned then by our operating beliefs, our attitudes, opinions. These are just things that we hold to be true, and typically we can express an operating belief as something we believe that, the sun is going to come up tomorrow, that the Dallas Cowboys are going to end the season in shambles like they should, that we've formed these different attitudes through our experiences, and the characteristic of them that we're really interested in is that they are readily susceptible to change. Attitudes are important because they lead to our behavior, and then our behavior obviously results in the experiences that form our lives. But if belief determines behavior, what determines our belief? And of course, we're constantly in flux because our experience of the world changes them all the time. Those influenced by our values don't necessarily change that often, but our attitudes informed by our experiences are constantly in flux. So here's how the mechanism works for the purposes of our exercise here. So let's take, this is a frugal functionalist, who is, those of you who may be in retail clothing would know the frugal functionalist pretty well. The frugal functionalist believes in getting value for his money. He also believes that high-end products are typically not worth the inflated price tag. And behaviorally, that means he won't pay more than he absolutely has to, and typically looks for sale items, which results in the satisfaction he gets the most he can from his budget. The point is, why does he think that way? And he thinks that way because of an experience. And this particular persona's experience is that the high-end products and services he's bought in the past have never met expectations set up by the hype, haven't been worth the premium, and have led to disappointment and remorse. And that experience then modifies the belief, which is that marketing alone makes these products and services desirable, not the reality of the experiences. And so that modifies behavior, and it means he doesn't pay attention to ads. He dismisses of claims made by brands unless they're backed up by the experience of real people. And the resulting experience there is his not being conned into overpaying for aspirational products. But the mechanism, again, is the cause and effect loop is what's important in terms of grasping and then being able to apply the mental model, because when you modify the experience, you modify the belief and the consequent behavior. And behavior, obviously, is what you're interested in terms of how people are going to respond to your website, how they're going to respond to your content, how they're going to respond to your product in terms of buying it, reordering it, whatever. Okay, so that was the model, and back to the process. The red here is just meant to underline the notion that the model underpins every step in the process. And as we go through and explain the process to you, I apologize because the examples are going to be somewhat eclectic. They'll jump from B2B, B2C, and what else happens. So think of all the aspects of the research that you do. One-on-one interviews, open text responses from survey data, feedback from your call centers, secondary research, existing primary research that you may have. And what we do when we're conducting interviews, we use the model. When we're looking at existing open text data, we'll apply the model. So if you consider, again, what would be a completely natural response to a question about CMOs, you might get something like this. So historically speaking, CMOs are less concerned about risks than their CIO counterparts. Generally, the CMO will have a larger slice of the overall enterprise budget, perhaps 25 to 30%, compared with 10 to 15% for the CIO. And And basically the CMO is not afraid to rip and replace technology if it doesn't bring the desired results in the expected time frame. That willingness creates a contentious relationship between the CMO and the CIO. They each build their own constituencies and pursue their own agendas and leave it for the CEO or the CFO to mediate. They just think in terms of survival of the fittest. Now, if you think of that just natural flow, but you break it out and parse it into beliefs, behaviors, and experiences, it looks like this. And so this is the exercise that we go through in terms of either making sure that we explore the behavior around each belief, the experiences that produce belief, and complete that loop. As we're extracting and identifying, we then log and tag all of the different elements, the attitudes, behaviors, experiences, and we build essentially an inventory of these elements for every one of the personas. And they really then become the Lego blocks, if you like, from which you construct the persona. We relate all the experiences, beliefs, behaviors to the need state analysis, and then eventually construct the persona. And again, the format will change depending upon the context and the need, but typically we'll always put together three perspectives: the sort of third-party perspective, the first person, the voice, and then the so what from the point of view of the client. Every element within the personas will be tagged so that it's fully defensible. You can take any statement from within the personas and readily find out its attribution. And then the way we deliver personas is there's always a training component. And the persona documents become the raw materials, the training materials. When we can do it, when the organizational logistics allow it, this is a 2-day classroom event where we pull everybody together, and they then use the materials and they sort of deconstruct the personas into those constituent attitudes, behaviors, beliefs. And they'll do this as team exercises, and then again, working as teams, they will reconstruct the mental models for each of the personas. And again, this is an example of how the marketing, the CMO here, one of the key values is he believes in managing by metrics. So he also believes that they need to monitor, measure, and manage relevance, which means that they need to deploy a universal control and command system for the social marketing strategy, which results in their being technically and managerially equipped to handle what in the persona is the campaign he's running to get a deal to do Game of Thrones. So when the teams have gone through that exercise, they may have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of these mental models for each persona, and that then allows them to go through that exercise that I outlined at the beginning in terms of using the personas then to be able to predict how they will respond to whatever stimulus you may be putting out there. So in this example here, the content marketing strategy has put 4 options, laying out the key messages as an infographic, giving case studies, but just trying to understand whether they need to put a registration requirement in order to be given access to case studies, 10 most common mistakes, 2-minute video and vision. And so for any stimulus, you can put them in front of the persona and, again, understand how he would react and then explain exactly why he would react that way. And that takes a lot of the discussion out of it. It really does reduce rework because there is certitude in the decision making, and it's much easier to come to consensus. And again, for those of you who've worked in a company of large teams trying to reach consensus on the features or the functionalities of a new website, you know how onerous and painful a process that can be. One of the agencies that we've worked with said that this incorporating predictive personas into their process reduced the time needed to come to consensus by about 70%. There's nothing that I could give you really statistical backing for that, but anecdotally at least, that's what they think. The last part of the exercise is typically trying to ensure that the personas become central to decision-making processes. So given the way that teams will work in different ways in different organizations and different cultures, it's up to them to decide how they're going to incorporate the discipline of making decisions through the eyes of the persona into their processes. And that's important, obviously, because what they're trying to do is to design the experience that produces the beliefs that lead to the desired behaviors. So when we produce personas, the objectives and the deliverables dictate the format, and more these days, the infographic is becoming popular. But understanding the way in which, again, we've conducted research to try and extract key beliefs, behaviors, and experiences, this might be illustrative of how to incorporate them in a way that really adds to the power and the authenticity of the personas. So each of these little icons would represent probably a different voice in terms of who we have interviewed in order to compile, in this case, the Chief Financial Officer. So here then is just an example of how we layer the assets around this notion of beliefs and behaviors.
My biggest challenge isn't just to say no. My challenge is to find a way to make it happen. My challenge is to be, my imperative is to be a business partner, to be involved in the solution. Because if you think about what emerging technology is, there's clearly large public companies that you compete with. And so you don't have more money than they do. You don't have more people. You might be a little bit smarter in the area that you're performing. You're executing against it. So what makes us different is our ability to move with speed and get out in front of them. And so the challenge is not to be a roadblock, but to make sure that you're making all the right decisions with the limited amount of information you have available.
So if you can imagine being in a training workshop, if you like, that type of response will give you a great deal of insight into how this persona thinks, how that thought process leads to behaviors that are the desired outcomes that he wants in order to execute. And the sort of richness of that underpins all of the deliverables that we have. More and more, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing that we do out here, that persona projects are typically supporting customer journey mapping, decision mapping, And that's important purely and simply because decision-making behaviors or purchasing behaviors can differ so widely across personas, even within a set. For the content marketing teams operating in the B2B world, what we're seeing is, again, a lot of content audits so that we understand exactly how each persona is consuming what type of content at each step in the decision-making journey. And then, again, those of you who are practitioners and used to putting this together, you understand that customer journeys are often very, very complicated with so many touch points. I was going through an exercise the other day trying to list out all the touch points, and I stopped when I got to 50. It's ever more complex and more difficult to sort of condense it into a single visual. So we'll typically break down these days an overall customer experience into discrete events. And so this one is the upgrade experience for an existing mobile smartphone persona. And as you can see, what we have here are, the impact at each step in the process, in the journey. There will be sort of a positive, a negative, or a neutral effect on the persona's affinity for the company. And so that's where we sort of tie everything together, because the maps help identify where and how to change the experience so you can reframe the beliefs and encourage the desired behaviors. And that's essentially, again, where the disciplines of persona development, the predictive persona development, and journey mapping, decision-making mapping come together. And with that, that's the sort of end of the presentation. So thank you for listening. Happy fishing if this has given you anything that you can use to fish with. We've got a whole batch of persona development material on our website, and with that, I think Ben's just going to see if there are any questions that you want to submit or have arisen already.